Welcome. In this video, we will guide you through the Gearbox disassembly and reassembly of Viking pumps, TRA 10 series and TRA 20 series circumferential piston pumps using our service kit with genuine Viking pump spare parts. Before you begin, please consult the technical service manual for safety information and to make sure all maintenance steps are completed. A copy of the latest revision can be found on our website at vikingpump.com. A complete listing of required tools can be found in the technical service manual. Each Viking pump service kit contains all required spare parts. To begin, the front cover, rotors, seals, and rotor case will need to be removed from the gearbox. For steps on this procedure, please consult our TRA 10 or TRA 20 series disassembly videos. Once the rotor case has been removed, remove the oil drain plug from the lowest position and drain the oil. At this point, thoroughly clean out any old grease by removing the cleanout plugs. Grease can be wiped out with a finger or rag. Next, remove the gearbox cover cap screws. Remove the gearbox cover. A soft-headed hammer may be used to loosen the cover. Scrape the residual sealant from the gearbox and cover. Next, using an arbor press, remove the lip seal from the cover and discard. Using a soft hammer and a flathead screwdriver or punch, bend back the lock washer tabs from each lock nut. To prevent the shafts from turning, place a wooden block or piece of copper wire between the gears. The pump may be clamped to the bench to further aid with lock nut removal. Use a lock nut tool, hook nose spanner wrench, or punch to remove each lock nut and lock washer. The shaft ends can be wrapped in tape to protect the keyways and splines throughout disassembly. Loosen and remove the front bearing retainer bolts. At this point, the shafts, timing gears, keys, bearing retainers, bearings, and shims can be pressed out using an arbor press. Place the gearbox in an arbor press, shaft end up. Place a press fixture on the end of the shaft to protect it and press each shaft assembly out. Remember to remove the timing gears from the gearbox once the shafts have been removed. Next, press out and discard the rear grease lip seals from the gearbox. At this point, thoroughly clean out any old grease and inspect the gearbox. Collect the shims from each shaft and note which shaft each had come from so that they can be reused if undamaged. From each shaft, remove the timing gear key, bearing retainer, and spacer collar. Next, using V-blocks for support, press the bearings and spacers off each shaft. Press out and discard the bearing retainer lip seals. It is now time to begin reassembling the pump. First, install new lip seals into the bearing retainers. Start by lubricating the lips with a compatible lubricant. Then, press them into place with the lip facing inward toward the front bearings. Do this for each bearing retainer. Next, lubricate the front bearing area of the shaft and position in the hydraulic press with the spline end down. Place the front bearing on the shaft. Place the inner and outer spacers onto the bearing. Next, place the remaining bearing components as shown. Now place the spacer bearing. Using a length of pipe, press against the spacer bearing until the front bearing is fully seated against the shaft shoulder. Next, lubricate the rear bearing area of the shaft and place the rear bearing over the shaft with the open side up. Using a length of pipe, press against the inner race of the rear bearing until it seats against the spacer. Repeat this process for the other shaft. Place the original shims against the shoulder in their original bearing bore location. If any of the shims are worn or damaged, clearances will need to be measured first to determine the required shims. For steps on this procedure, please consult our video on gearbox clearance and shimming calculation. Once the proper shim amount has been determined and the shims have been placed, place the gearbox on the arbor press. Ensure each shaft is in the correct position, and using a piece of pipe, press on the shaft shoulder to press it into place until the bearing is seated against the shims. Do this for each shaft. Next, the clearances must be checked before continuing with the reassembly. Place the rotor case on the gearbox and install and tighten the retaining screws. Note that the 2100 and 3200 models of the TRA-20 series utilize arch shims between the gearbox and rotor case. Ensure these arch shims are also in place. Then secure each rotor in place. The seals do not need to be installed at this time. Check the rear backface clearance with feeler gauges and compare to the values in the service manual. If necessary, remove the rotors and rotor case and press out the shafts in order to add or remove shims as needed. Once the backface clearance has been established in accordance with the values in the manual, remove the rotors and rotor case. Secure the shaft assemblies in place with the bearing retainers. Dry fit each retainer in place and confirm with feeler gauges that there is a 50 to 60 thousandths of an inch gap between the retainer and the gearbox. Reconfirm that the backface clearance is correct. Remove the retainers and apply grease to all fittings until it's visible around both the front and rear bearing assemblies. Turning the shaft will aid in grease distribution. Coat the outside flange of the bearing retainers with silicone sealant. Install each retainer and tighten the retainer cap screws. Next, lubricate the rear oil seals. Using an arbor press, install the rear oil seals with the lips facing toward the bearing. Install the rear gear spacers. Apply grease to the fittings. Place the gear keys into the shaft key slots. Next, slide the gear with the single punch mark onto the drive shaft and the gear with the 2 punch marks onto the shorter driven shaft. Make sure to align the driven gear punch marks on either side of the drive gear punch mark. Install the lock washers and lock nuts onto the shafts. Make sure to align the lock nut tab with the slot on the shaft. Using a lock nut tool, tighten each to the specified torque value. This can be found in the technical service manual. To keep the gears from turning, insert a wooden block or copper wire between the gear teeth. Locate the tab best aligned with a slot on the lock nut and bend the tab down to secure. Do this for each lock nut. Next, replace the drain plug. Wrap PTFE tape around the plug threads and install. Press a new lip seal into the gearbox cover with the lip facing outward. Apply a continuous bead of silicone sealant around the gear case, following along the inboard side of each bolt hole. Secure the gearbox cover. The shaft key may be taped over to protect the gearbox cover lip seal. Torque the cap screws to the appropriate torque value. This can be found in the technical service manual. Finally, fill the gear case with oil. First, remove the plug at the top of the gearbox. Measure and add in the appropriate amount of oil, or utilize the oil level plug located on the side of the gearbox by removing it and visually checking the oil level. Reinstall the top oil plug. Your TRA-10 or TRA-20 series gearbox now has new bearings and seals and is ready for final assembly. The next steps include the installation of new seals and the assembly of the rotor case end of the pump. Please view our seal replacement and assembly videos for the steps to these procedures. Once fully assembled, your Viking pump TRA-10 or TRA-20 series circumferential piston pump is fully repaired and ready to be put back into service. For more information or additional service videos, please visit our website at vikingpump.com.